Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Your Mental. Just a reminder that this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. I know they are hard to find, and I get that. I have a bunch of resources on my website if you need them, but I am not your clinician. I am a psychologist, but I am not your psychologist. So if you need any specific help, please look for the help of a licensed mental health professional. Learn all you can learn from the podcast. Enjoy the episode. But thank you so much for coming on the show. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today was I saw your post about what led to you writing your first book, Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness, What It Means to Be Black Now. And it instantly made me think of the conceptual framework I've been trying to come up with for Black identity development. I've always felt that the other ones are kind of limiting because, not limiting. Okay, I don't want to say limiting as a scientist. I've always felt as though when I've read them, that we were missing a certain aspect of it. And I don't know if you're aware of me, but I'm a professor at TSU. I'm also a psychologist, and I also publish.
You said TSU?
Tennessee State University.
Tennessee? Yeah, great. Cool.
And one of the things in teaching is that I've noticed that I feel like there are different things that are being missed from the frameworks that are out there and engaging with the students and things of that nature.
Yeah. I am an intellectual, not an academician, right?
Mhm.
And I understand the difference, right? And one of the things I noticed in the book, because there's folks from the academy and then there's smart, regular folks in the book. And the notion of the performance of the Blackness as a performance to all the academicians were like, yes, of course. And to almost all civilians was offensive and triggering and like, what are you talking about? It's not a performance. It's just who I am. And just explaining to them the notion of, well, personality is a performance. And it was like, this was like, just even the idea that personality was a performance was revolutionary to them. There's a space, it's just kind of an awareness of what we're talking about as far as fluidity. But yes, I don't feel comfortable with any definition of Blackness that excludes any Black person, right? And including traitorous choices with it, right? Like Candace Owens is a traitor to Blackness, right?
Yeah.
Or one might, I could name any number of people who we might agree, like that person's an Oreo, right? Like in the traditional vision of what that means, right?
Mhm.
But even those choices are African American choices to the situation that we're in, right? So it couldn't just be, one of the things that we talk about, the notion of an essentialist vision of what Blackness means really redounds to, it's really about being from the hood. As if the hood is the refrigerator and Blackness is the milk, and the longer it goes outside of the fridge, it spoils, right? And I was like, no, like you could be Black in Beverly Hills and PG County and like with money and like, it doesn't have to be hood. It doesn't have to be, rooted in James Brown. It could be many different things.
Yeah, because even with your mention of like the individuals who are catastrophic to the Black experience, like to quote your book, you specifically mentioned, I think what Clarence Thomas has done on the Supreme Court is wholly destructive to Black folk. And I'm willing to root my arguments about his catastrophic performance and reasoned claims about politics and race, but he isn't any less Black than I am. He's got a different take on Blackness and race than I do.
I mean, we are all responding to racism in one way or another.
Yeah.
Many of us choose to respond to racism by building community, right? And I feel safe because I see a person like you and I can talk to you and bond with you. And I feel like, well, she's a sister, so I should be able to feel close to her. And he's responding to racism also. He's just choosing a different response and thinking that, aligning with them will keep him safe.
Hey everyone, just a reminder that Mind Your Mental is not just a podcast, it is also a amazing community, if I do say so myself. It's phenomenal. I mean, you get more access to me. What more could you want in this life? So if you want to join the community, if you're not already on the community, go to my social media. My social media is the same, Raquel Martin, PhD, and DM me the word community so you can get details on joining this amazing flipping community. You get more access to me, y'all. Like, I'm a delight. All right. Hope to see you there. I wholeheartedly try to embody and work in the aspect of like, I'm not only pro blackness that mirrors my own. And then I
Right.
also instantly get pissed when I hear people's names in that realm that I think have also been catastrophic to the Black experience. And then there's always this conflict with that whole aspect of like, all right, now, well, you can't say I'm only pro Blackness I can't say I'm only pro Blackness when it doesn't, I'm not only pro Black when
I
it mirrors
mean,
my own. And then still get mad and just be like, because I've never stated the aspect of like people aren't Black enough as someone who's had the penultimate insult of being like talking white, but I feel like it's
yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
tough. It's also like
I
really
mean,
tough to be like, all right, I'll be real though, that man pisses me
I
off.
mean, it kind of becomes a little semantic almost because
Mm,
I'm just saying these are all responses to being Black in America.
yeah.
Now, Now, that is a problematic and troubling response.
Hmm.
Condoleezza Rice, Candace Owens, Jason Whitlock, like that's a horrible response, right? That is anti the community. As opposed, but I'm not saying those are not, they are in many ways anti Black, but they are not Black, right?
Yeah.
Like we're missing it if we think you're not Black. Now, if you categorize it as they are anti Black, absolutely. And I push back against the notion that Black people can't be racist by saying, well, Candace Owens is one obvious example, is working in service of white supremacy. She
Hmm.
doesn't have the power, right? The argument's always like, well, only certain people have power. She has power in her world to make us look bad and give comfort and space and power to racist people.
Yeah.
So she's working in service of white supremacy. So that is racism. That is active racism. You know, the other part of the notion still stands, but I'm like, of course we can be racist right there.
Yeah, I get pushback on that all the time. And I think
I'm
it's
sorry. One thing you'll see. I'm sorry. What I just remind. I haven't thought about this book in a long time. One thing that I see, I think that I found that comes in about the middle of the book, a psychological study I found that like even Black people who are not, I don't know how to frame this, like uh, who are not, I'm going to colloquially, I'm saying not all there.
Mhm.
Very few Black people wish to be white, right?
Yeah.
That's very rare, right? So it's not that we want to escape Blackness and become white, but I think some of us do see a value and a power in surrounding yourself with them and not threatening them. That's the thing, right? That if you are too non-threatening to white people, then we get upset, right? Like we like to see us, like you're willing to tell them off, right? You're
Mhm.
willing to scratch them, right? As opposed to like, I've seen a lot of right righteous attack on Emmanuel Acho recently, who did this horrible white centric show, right? Did you ever see it? Because it was
Yeah,
very
I
white
actually
centric show.
I did a response to just his statement to Angel Reese because it just
Well, that
contributes to.
for sure.
Yeah.
But he did this whole white centric show where he would talk to white people about racism and is very much like, let's sit and make you comfortable to have a conversation with a Black man. I think it was uncomfortable conversations. But it was this group of white people who were like, let's make it easy for you to have this conversation and say that you feel bad about, like, you're just helping the whites.
Yeah.
Like you're completely non-threatening, and that bothers us, right? When we're like, you're completely non-threatening to the whites, like,
But
yeah, we don't trust you.
I even think that aspect of when you mentioned the proximity, it's out of fear, right? Because it's just like you understand that closeness if you're trying to get closer to whiteness is because you know that if you're seen as safe, maybe you won't be less dangerous, maybe you'll have some aspect of freedom. And I mean, like in your book, you particularly mentioned when you did the show, I'll Try Anything Once, right?
Mhm,
And you
mhm.
were talking in the book about like, and also I know you haven't thought about the book in a while, but like I kind of think you should redo with the same questions with new people. Just gonna throw that out there. But because the questions you have in the beginning are really good questions. So I
Mm.
know you haven't thought about it in a while, but I think it's worth it to do the entire, do like it and do it with new people because the questions are really good.
Thank you.
And I would, you know, anyway, but when you mentioned that aspect of it was the story about jumping out of plane skydiving. And you mentioned you were sitting at the table before you went skydiving, and there were three Black gentlemen who recognized you, and you told them what you were doing, and they were like, "Oh, we don't. Black people don't do that." And like, it seemed like from what I read, it was like whispering in a tone because you were sitting with non-black people and they were just like, "Oh, I just want to wake you up. Like, I just want to, you know,
Yeah.
what is it? Hit the spoon on the teacup
Yeah.
because you must be out of it. We don't do that, right?" And I
Right.
instantly knew what you were talking about because the whisper is just like it's the whisper. And one of the things you mentioned is how, it's limiting to be in that realm, right? Like a lot of the things that you mentioned in the book are
Yeah.
how these thought processes are limiting. I forget who you were interviewing particularly, but they mentioned they hated the concept of being real because that just made it limiting. Even in this
Yeah.
example you just gave about like blackness being in the fridge, and the longer the fridge being the hood, and the longer it's in the hood, the more salient it is. You could come out with that. And I've always felt as though, and it is very much true that like that is kind of what like chokes us in terms of getting out there and knowing more about ourselves, and then as a result contributing to the community in the way it deserves. Because the same way you mentioned that like European American children have been doing, people have been doing this their whole life, that freedom, that whole stereotypical aspect of it, that whole there's only one right way to be black, that whole like adultification, dehumanization, all it does is contributes to white supremacy, but that robs us of our freedoms. And in doing so, we're honestly, in my opinion, contributing to the sublimation of the black experience and what we can become under the guise of being black enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's because
Mm-hmm.
it's just limiting, right? Like the whole reason why I think it's infuriating because it's just like, and in stating that there's one right way to be black, you're trying to basically like hone in on the black experience and save our culture. But in doing that, you're actually robbing us of the possibility of our culture to grow. And I don't think many
Yeah.
people see it that way, which
Definitely,
can be difficult.
definitely seen over my years, especially like 70s and 80s, there would be these little clubs, black skiers, black scuba divers,
Mhm.
who were doing things that black people don't do, right? And they were like, we're doing them. And there was this air of like, we need to show others like this is cool. It's cool to ski. It's cool to skydive. It's cool to scuba dive, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Um, and like it, they did it out of love, but also a sense of like, we can take our blackness is portable. Like we could take it with us
Mhm.
to scuba diving, to skiing, whatever. And like, these places may or may not want us, but we're going anyway. But also making sure that other black people know like it's cool. And like when and then when you see it, like, look at these cool guys went scuba diving, and these women, they went scuba diving. Oh, like, it's cool. And you realize, like, it's fine for us to go anywhere. Now, I mean, I personally have had some success in my career as far as being able to code switch, right? And I mean, I think everybody has to some extent, but there
Well,
was a
wait, do you think
time.
it's code switching or masking? Do you think it's code switching or masking?
No, there's absolutely code switching for sure. I mean, like I am performing different modes of my personality
Mhm.
with different audiences, and I am, because of my particular background, I am maybe a little bit better at it than X person, right? There's others who are better than me,
Mhm.
right? But I'm a little bit better than this other person, right? Because I mean, like I'm 12 years in New England private school, so I knew very well how to. When I came to New York to be a writer, I knew how to talk to the whites, so that they felt very comfortable with my intelligence, with having me around. You understand, like, if you make them feel like they're racist, that's like that's the thing that will, but you also need to stand your ground when things happen, right? When things are said that really hurt you, right? But just there was a time when then there was, let's say, a group of people who had come to New York, maybe six or seven of us who had come to New York from around the country, some from New York, but some from other places, Detroit, LA, whatever, to be writers about hip hop, right? I dream of writing about hip hop. I came to New York. I'm trying to do this. And all the rest of them were writing for black publications, The Source, Double XL, stuff like that. I was writing for Rolling Stone. And I was really the only one at that stage that got on at a white publication
Mhm.
at that stage of history. And, you could I could see, I think others could see, like, he can talk to the whites a little bit better
Mm.
so than we can, right? I mean, I think they would have said we don't want what he has, but there was I think there was an understanding of, like, just how to communicate with them is really important.
Do you ever find
So
that
it's code switching.
exhausting? Because the reason why I try to differentiate between code switching and masking is just root word wise. Code means language, switching means back and forth. So I find code switching to be solely language. However, the aspect of masking is what I find most Black people to be doing. And the reason why it's important to differentiate between the two is because masking contributes to greater aspects of suicide ideation, burnout, anxiety, depression, loss of
I'm not
identity.
I'm not pretending to be something I'm not in the code switching. I am speaking, and masking to me suggests hiding something. I
Hmm.
am speaking appropriately to the audience. I don't speak to my little niece the same way I speak to my grandmother, but I am still me. But I understand if I do the high voice and very direct words, she will understand, right? If I do a softer tone, right, with my grandma, like, she'll understand that. Talk to my friends a different way. I'm not being myself. I'm just putting. Is it exhausting? I mean, you know, that's a much bigger question, and always strive to have my work be Black centric,
Hmm.
right? So my imagined reader is a Black person. I'm thinking about what they know and don't know, and what they care about and don't care about. And that goes down, like, granularly in sentences. I was on television reading something once, and somebody said, we were talking about Cassius Clay. And when he changed his name, it was very controversial.
Hmm.
And I was like, whoa, hold on. It was not controversial to Black people. So what are we saying here, right? We have to change this sentence because this is only reflecting white people's opinion. Because Black people, my father used to talk about, Black people were like, go ahead. Like, we're down with this.
We
This
be
is
the
cool.
first one to be like, if you like it, I love it, even if we don't even like it. Like just be
But
like, all right,
but even
okay.
but the public movement to Islam from, Kareem, Ali, some other people, like, Black people were like, the most Black people were like, that's fine. Like, we were thinking about being turning Islam ourselves. So, like, that you did it, like, that's cool. It was controversial to white people, but I'm like, I'm not saying, but I mean, like, you gotta do what you gotta do to get along with your coworkers sometimes. And, I don't feel like I'm giving something up because I didn't say ain't, because that would not communicate to them. And it reads to you and it means something to you, right? I'm being in communion with you when I say, my sister, there ain't no, but, like, I don't need to say that to them. Like,
Do you think
that's not the audience.
do you think there's a time where can you identify a time where you feel like you were masking, or do you feel like you've never had to?
That I was masking?
Hmm.
You mean like hiding? I mean, part of the thing is
Well,
my
you're saying
career,
hiding.
but my career has been in almost entirely writing about Black culture and Black subjects.
Hmm.
Even if I'm at a white publication, New York Times, Rolling Stone, what have you, Art Forum, whatever, I'm still the Black guy writing about Black stuff.
Okay.
So I'm never having to pretend or mask. I just need to be able to communicate. I am smart enough to talk about this culture in your white publication, and to make it see, part of the game is to make it clear to them that this is valuable. So, because I'm part of a period when we still kind of had to argue at the beginning, we still had to argue for the viability and importance of hip hop in these mainstream publications. We had a whole, when Snoop Dogg was doing his debut album, solo album, there was a whole argument with the New York Times about whether or not this even merited coverage.
Hmm.
And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. This is like the biggest shit. They didn't really get it. I took a month. I just remembered this. It took a month of conversation. I mean, like every single day on the phone with the editor, talking. And he's black, but he has to go to white people above him, and to talking about Snoop Dogg every day, to finally get him to be like, okay, I think this will work. I think I can sell this to them. They didn't get it. And I think part of the thing that made it work was the notion that Snoop, within his voice, carries notes of the Great Migration, because his people are from Mississippi, and he sounds like he has a Southern accent, even though he's from Southern California. So you can hear that in, like, the twang is very Southern California, but it's also reminiscent of Mississippi and the Deep South. So when I'm able to bring in that level of analysis of Snoop beyond just he's a great rapper, then they were able to be like, okay, this makes sense for us. So there's no masking. I'm not pretending to not be black. I'm trying to say, I'm trying to say blackness is deeper than you realize. And I have to fight to get them to see it. And I
Well,
may have to use their verbal tools to get them to see it. But then we're talking about blackness the whole time.
yeah, I get that. I guess I never see it as a pretending. I mean, it's just academia wise, it's typically, I guess it is an aspect of pretending, but it's seen as a survival technique, like it's a survival strategy. Honestly, the majority of the research that's done when it comes to masking is with individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And then in doing the research in that, I'm like, oh, this is what most Black people do every day. I don't see many, but I don't see the way that you're able to limit it to language. I don't see all Black people doing that or even having the ability to do that. I see that in terms of changing their voice and their laugh and their posture. I had a patient at one point, he was a taller Black man who would literally shrink himself and not be standing in meetings because he felt his height would be perceived as threatening to people, right? Changing the clothes, changing the topics that they even discuss, which, like, I see it differently. I see it as a survival strategy. And maybe in thinking of talking to you about it and that pretending aspect of it, they're pretending as a way to survive. But I've seen it
I
in
mean,
more than
I don't, I
communication.
would not, yeah, I would not question the research that you've gotten from, looking at multiple patients.
Hmm.
I would say that for me, because I'm here to talk about Black culture, be it on CNN or Rolling Stone or wherever, I still feel comfortable communicating a certain amount of, yeah, I'm Black. Like, I don't have to hide myself. I mean, so I don't have to separate myself from that,
Hmm.
because I'm clearly going to talk about the Black subjects. I'm here to talk about the Black subjects.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of the private school experience was like, you know, here's how to be Black within that. So we're not erasing that part of ourselves for you. We are figuring out how to present that in a way that we can all still get along and I can get what I need out of this exchange. Um, but I never want you to forget that I'm Black, because that I know that is part of what makes me valuable in these media spaces.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the only one, but if I understand that I am the only one, then I need to make sure I love being Black. I'm all about that, and I'm going to bring that into my work. See, for me at Rolling Stone, especially, I went through this. It was very hard to get an assignment to write about a white person, and they would ask me questions in my earlier years, stuff like, can you write about a white person? Like when I was first
Like, do your
trying to
hands
move
just
from
like
free,
tighten up as soon as you write the word Madonna?
right? Like I wouldn't be able to conceive of when I was the first time I met with somebody, a top editor, asking if I could go from freelance to a contract writer, which meant, we have to give you, 8 or 10 stories a year or whatever it was, because like, you're on contract now. And the guy said, well, we know you can write about Run DMC, but could you write about Bob Dylan? Say, like, I don't have the flexibility. and I'm going, I don't remember what I said because I don't know if I can defeat this argument in the room. I have to defeat it in a different way. But I'm like, Bob Dylan comes directly from black music. No, it was Eric Clapton. He said Eric Clapton. He said Eric Clapton. And that's why I was like, he's a blues artist. Like, what are you talking about? And I mean, I'm like 26 at the time, and he's like 50. So I don't know. I don't have the spirit that I would now to be like, that's like the worst example you could give. Like, he's a blues artist. Like, it would be incredibly valuable for us, me and Eric Clapton, to have a conversation about the blues and talk to a black person about the blues. But, you know, that's the notion of like, well, we see you able to do black stuff. So if I know that you see me able to do black stuff, I'm comfortable coming into the situation as like, yeah, I'm a black person. I love hip hop. I was at the club last night. I feel very comfortable. You should feel comfortable sending me out to hang out with rappers because, like, that's my cousins. That's my brothers. Like, that's easy stuff for me. Talking to you, not you, Dr. Martin, but you, white editor of Rolling Stone, that I can also do. Right, but you know, you don't have to question. Can he go hang out with a Tribe Called Quest? We know that, but also look, he's in this room with his editor having a very writerly conversation. Like, I didn't see it as exhausting. I think the space that I was able to occupy was enough for me.
Just now you mentioned, I didn't know if this was something that I was going to, I think you said fight in the room or outside of the room. Can you explain the difference to me with that? Like, because I'm sure many people have had issues, and I like the fact that you differentiated in the room or outside the room. So can you share more about what that looks like?
If you're in the midst of a corporate structure, let's say there's 10 people there, the top person is not your ally. They are the ultimate decider of what happens, right? I am interacting with the top person. I am, in this part of my life, I am low on this, in this group of 10 people, right? And I'm trying to move up. The number 2 or 3 person is my ace. They are vouching for me. That's why I was able to get into the top 10, right? Because the number 2 or 3, maybe 2, 3, and 4 are like, we really like him. He's really good. The number 1 person is like, I'm still not sure. I could argue with the number 1 person, and I may not get what I want out of that, because challenging the number 1 person as the number 10 person could be insulting to them, right? You can't defrock them. You can't tell them you're wrong, you're an idiot. Like, you have to speak to them in a way that allows them to change their mind without feeling like they were wrong. And you engaging in a direct logical argument, sir, Eric Clapton is a blues artist. Of course I could do that. May be like, you have to know the person. They may be like, good idea. You're right. But what about Kurt Cobain? Like, okay, so that right, they don't come from the blues, right? So that harder. Or you could retreat from that specific meeting and that specific conversation, because you're not trying to get a job. You're already in this corporate structure. You're just trying to move up to get a new project, to get a new title, whatever. So go back to the people who are your aces and speak to them and get them to be your ally and to speak to the top person about, hey, I really think he would be good for that project. Better to come from somebody else advocating for you than you fighting for yourself.
And why is it important to not let them know they were wrong?
Nobody likes to be told that they're wrong. And the higher you move up in any structure, in any human structure, the less often you'll be told that, you know? And like, when you are told you're wrong, for the most part, humans get defensive. And they generally won't change. People generally don't change their mind when presented with information that shows that they were wrong. Most of the time, most people are not won over by a logical appeal. They are won over by an emotional appeal more often. But please does not work in any corporate setting. So I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that it's about marshaling allies to talk up for you as opposed to arguing as if you're in a debate. You're not in a debate. It's not about the idea, the specific idea. It's about the opinion in that group of you. And if you get another person in that group to argue on your behalf, they are saying, I stand beside Dr. Martin. She's cool. She deserves tenure. I think she's a great addition to our full-time staff, whatever it is. But also, you are not in a powerful position when you are saying my resume is the facts of why I deserve X are th-" that is not a powerful position. Somebody else who knows, yo, she's been here 15 years. She has 2 PhDs. She wrote 3 books. She should get tenure. That person going above, the number 2, 3, 4 person going above, saying she deserves tenure or whatever it is we're talking about, that is more powerful than you advocating for yourself. So that's how I'm saying that can I win this argument in this room? I don't know, and I don't want to get into a small ball. The point is, can I do the job? Right? The small ball argument. Can you write about this specific old white person? Like, I don't want to engage in that. I want you to know I can do the job. And the number 2 guy can come back in here later, chill it out, and tell you, like, yo, he can definitely do the job. And I ended up getting the job of retreating from that room, talking to somebody else. I didn't tell him a sob story. It was just like, hey, I really want to be on contract. And he's like, okay, let me go talk to Bob and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could talk about that all day, but I don't want to not waste your time. But I know I just have a natural contrarian.
What do
Yeah,
you mean?
like I would want you.
You would argue with him in
Well,
room?
it's not argument, right? Because like these are just facts. Earth is round, water is wet. I can do this. That like it's not an argument. Like this is just what it is. But there's also that aspect of I feel like the reason why we're having issues that we are having now is because people aren't told that they're wrong. And it's because of their power. And because of that, individuals, rightfully so, have like a fear, but not telling people that they're wrong. And then the aspect of like you have people who will go around and be like, they'll advocate for you. But some people aren't going to do that. So the person is never going to be told that they're wrong. They're going to keep doing wrong things. Their level of power is going to create like a great silo for that. And it's because, well, nobody likes being told they're wrong. Well, work on yourself and stop being wrong. I don't. I know nobody likes it, but I think there's a way to. I know the way that you're talking about doing it, but I would want to do it in the room. Because I think what you're talking about is the epitome of like, well, we're not talking about like.
You got to know who you're
calling
talking
in versus
to.
calling out. Yeah.
You may feel like I have a relationship with this leader that allows me to say, I mean,
it's context.
Look, yeah, I mean, if you have that relationship, then go for it. If you don't, then you can retreat and say, I'm going to get my ally to do this for me. But I mean, I know just from personal experience, when someone says you're wrong, I get defensive. If somebody says, let me show you another way to look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, tell me. And like, well, I would look at it this way. And it's like, oh, you didn't say I was wrong. You allowed me to feel good about what I believe, but you also showed me a new way. Like, okay, all right. I feel validated and at the same time pointed to a new way of seeing things. But, when you're that's talking about ideas. If you're talking about yourself, it's just maybe trickier.
Yeah, I mean, it's
this is not necessarily the tactic you have to use in every situation.
No,
but
it's
you
not.
asked me about that idea of arguing outside the room.
Yeah, and I'll just end on this one because I think that this is something that I would really like to hear more from you about. What do you feel like now? I mean, you wrote this book. When did you write this book?
2010, I think. Something
2010.
Like that. 2012. 2010.
So at least a decade ago.
Yeah, it was 2010 because they were like, you better hurry up and finish this because we don't know if Obama will be reelected. and
Oh,
we're not publishing
then we're
this.
not going
And
to
they
be able
didn't
to
overtly
finish
say we're
this.
not publishing this, but it was like, you have to get this done before Obama is running again.
Well, something you talk about a lot is being rooted in but not restricted by race. What do you think that
Yeah.
looks like now?
I mean, look, I don't think that um, looks much different now. There are things that I would do differently if I started writing this book now.
Okay,
But
maybe that's the question. That's the question. What would you do differently?
I mean, I do a lot of things differently. I mean, I don't want to do a whole critique of the book, but BLM had not happened. That's a whole deeper conversation. I think the notion of unapologetic blackness doesn't really come into this discussion because that's not where I was going. I was going toward, let's talk about fluidity,
Mhm.
but unapologetic blackness is really important, and it feels good, and it is self-affirming, and I think it's a great sort of example for others around us. I mean, I would have to include more of an economic conversation because this is very spiritual, and somebody was like, this is for middle class people, and I'm like,
So
I
is that
mean,
what they
yeah.
said?
Or somebody like, yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of. There's not an economic component to it, and the rash of deaths, the thrash of famous deaths that happened after publication, that alone would lead me to talking about this entirely differently.
You mentioned, because just full disclosure, I was in private school for a couple of years. I'm from Philly. My mom was working like a bunch of jobs to put me through private school. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. The only reason why I didn't tell her is because I knew she was working hard to send me through private school. But you mentioned private school a lot as one of the reasons why you were able to kind of get in that education and to understand how to engage like in communication. And you also mentioned the fact that you don't feel like you're masking. You understand that it's code switching and it's changing your language, right? What do you think contributes to, because I have to expect that, like, you've been around people who probably have felt the need to mask, or you've seen them doing that, and it's like, what do you think contributes to your experience being so different in terms of not having to do that versus the possibility, and this is of course opining, but like the possibility of other individuals not feeling comfortable doing that, and it's not solely about language for them, because you're very open about, like, no, I don't have to do that, but that's not
I
it,
can't speak.
like what.
I can't speak to others. I can't speak to others' experience in that way. I know that you know in high school and before, I learned how to function in these all white rooms,
Mhm.
right? At times that was a painful experience, but I learned how to do it. I also learned that the white man's ice is not any colder. They don't know anything that we don't know. They're not inherently smarter. So
Mhm.
it wasn't, I mean, and I was educated around some really brilliant kids, but overall, I'm like, white people are not smarter than us. Like, they don't have some inherent advantage intellectually or mentally over us. Like, they have more connections,
And
but
freedoms,
like,
yeah, that's what it is.
you know, so I came out of being around a ton of white people, mostly in high school, also in college and graduate school, but mostly the high school experience is more formative, of like not being all that impressed with them in general. Like, they're
Okay.
fine, but they ain't smarter than me. They don't know something I don't know.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, I felt confident to go to war with them, as far as I'm trying to make it in media, you're trying to make it in media too. Like, okay, let's see what happens. And I feel confident of my skills. Like, I remember the first thing we wrote in graduate school. I went to graduate school for creative writing, Columbia. The first thing that we wrote, we read them in class, and then afterward we came outside, and there was like a circle of like six, five or six, probably six people who were like among the best in the class, just sort of talking. And never forget, somebody turned to somebody else and said, how long did you spend on your essay? Because, like, write a 500-word essay. How long did you spend on your essay? And then they said how long they spent. And then they asked somebody else. And there was kind of like chatter kind of like this group conversation happening, but there's also chatter. And then the third person, she turned to me and said, "How long did you spend?" And the way she said it, I realized that whole line of questioning was to get to asking how long I spent. Because she was like, because clearly, and when she asked me, they all stopped talking. Because they were like, we want to know how long he spent.
Yeah.
Which that moment alone told me they all thought, oh, his was the best. So, like, how long does it take to be the best in the room? And I mean, the amount of time I spent relative to them is not important. The point was that I saw right away that they all were like, holy shit, he's the best one in that group. And there was nothing that had ever occurred to me that I wouldn't be. Because, like, I've been around you guys my whole life. I know I can fucking, like, now, when it was science and math also, I'm like, I hate science and math. I just hate those fucking subjects. In literature, I'm crushing y'all. So then we get to graduate school and we're just doing writing? Oh, forget it. I can beat y'all at this.
So do you think it's because you, instead of being in the silos of just solely being around people that look like you were able to actually have that experience to know that the ice isn't colder?
That was very helpful to me. I also understand the self-esteem that can be nurtured in a very Black experience.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I went to the AUC and was on the yard around Spelman and Morehouse kids and was like, their level of self-esteem is clearly different than ours. I mean, they are emanating a different light, and they are very deeply comfortable with themselves in ways that we over at Emory are not. Like, so I saw that firsthand, and that's just from being on the yard. I'm not, right? I mean, if I went into the experience completely, it's like amazing. So that is a very valuable experience. My experience, PWIs, learning their ice is not colder. They are not any smarter than us. There's no reason why I can't defeat them in any intellectual game. That was very helpful to me.
Okay. I like that. And I mean, it's what caught my attention when it came to the book in the first place, your story about why you decided, to start off with the book. Because that was the experience of the party and on campus. And that's like I heard that, I saw the video and I was like, oh, that freaking sucks. Honestly, even as a psychologist, I very much, I get I'm very Philly. I automatically go to like anger, which, Dr. Martin has a psychologist as well. But like, I was just like, that just pissed me off. That just really just pissed me. Like, what the?
It's gratifying because, yeah, it was mortifying and hurtful, but to think deeply about it and have a very thoughtful response, and to even now to tell that story and have so many people be like, bravo, good for you. I mean, I had Black people who, if I looked at them, I would not think that story would resonate for them, and they're like, that was great. Like,
I mean, your story went viral, like on campus, right? Like everybody was reading your.
Oh, I mean now, but yes, then yes, it was viral. We didn't use that word then, but for sure, it was viral in that community.
Yeah.
But then this now, telling it now, and all these people were like, I had a similar experience. Somebody said I wasn't. That was really powerful.